Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from the Right to Read Initiative and Garforth Education. Today, I have the wonderful Nancy Young joining me so that we can talk about the Right to Read inquiry and how the ladder of reading and writing relates to the recommendations we find in this report. So the Right to Read public inquiry was done by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, looking at making sure that we have equitable access to reading instruction. And the ladder of reading and writing is a great infographic explaining the different levels of access students have to learning how to read and write. And that's why I invited Nancy on to discuss her wonderful infographic in relation to these. So Nancy, I was hoping you could start out by introducing yourself and giving us a little quick overview of the ladder of reading and writing.
All right. Sorry, I was just writing a note based on something you said. I thought, oh, I have to address that. So my name is Nancy Young, and I live right now in British Columbia. I haven't always lived here. I've lived in 5 provinces in Canada and New Zealand. And reading and writing has been really my focus for the last 15 years. I'm an educator, but I'm also a parent of children who are actually in the dark green group, who were reading before school. And I've been providing teacher Ph.D. and consulting for a while now. I've written a book, which I don't have in front of me, but a book on enhancing instruction using movement. And I am a learner. That's kind of the nutshell on me. And do you want me to speak to the ladder?
Yeah, just give us a quick overview. Like, there is so much incredible information on this ladder of reading and writing, but I think just the core concepts so that we can then tie them into the recommendations that we see.
All right. So, so what I wrote down was, you said the ladder represents different levels of access, but the way I describe it is that the colors represent the ease at which children learn to read. No human is born knowing how to read. We all have to rewire our brain. And for some people, like my children, it seems easy because they were reading before school. And I didn't know anything that I know now when my children were young. Then for the last 15 years, I've been really interested in the challenges for children who do not learn to read easily. And over time, my specialty has really become bright children who have difficulty, who are, and I don't want to say have difficulty. I'm trying to reframe how I say things. It's more challenging. And so they need more support. And so the difficulty with this group actually depends on what we provide them. If we provide them with what they need, it will be far less difficult, and when we provide that. So this is the ease at which children learn to read based on the research. On the right are the instructional implications, recognizing that based on the ease, children require different instruction. And then data informs our instruction and informs exactly how we will approach the content and the process. Over on the far right, certain factors influence learning to read, such as linguistic processes, which would include naming speed, executive functions, attention regulation and working memory, psychological aspects, anxiety, and a child can have anxiety that is not there because of difficulty learning to read. They may have been, genetically, they may have been anxious even if they were advanced. And, there are children like that out there. And so it's really important to be aware that there are psychological aspects. And then environmental circumstances, that can be their dialect, That can be their background. There's a lot of focus right now on socioeconomic factors. So that arrow is the synopsis of that. And then the ladder itself, the climbing children are smiling to send across the message that climbing the ladder, and this is where the climbing happens. This is the ease of learning to read. And this is the actual climbing. Everybody has to rewire their brain. And for some children, it's more challenging than for others. But our job is to make sure that the journey is enjoyable no matter where they are. And then recently, because of my interest in movement, I'm starting to say, hey, they're moving while they're doing it. So there's so much research on that, and that's really a big part of my learning focus right now, is the research on movement. So that's really the synopsis of a ladder of reading and writing.
Well, and I think it's really important that it highlights that it's both reading and writing, because these processes are intertwined, and you need, like, reading is breathing in and writing is breathing out. Like, that's a very common analogy. So maybe I'm incorrect in saying this about your ladder, but we're also looking at spelling as part of writing. And, understanding sentence structure and the grammar that's needed for writing also helps with the comprehension aspect of reading. So while, there are lessons that are focusing on reading, we also need to make sure that there is that focus on writing the same skills at the same time to help enhance the instruction overall.
Right. We know that's important. We also know that for some children, writing is more difficult, but we also know that for some children, so for example, a child who's twice exceptional, gifted in dyslexia, who has very high vocabulary, we need to focus on what they need. And so differentiation within each group is really important, because we know that vocabulary and, all sorts of things to do with spoken language at home and so on can influence writing. So there are a lot of factors to consider in this, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And there's several different recommendations that we're hoping to touch on today. So I want to start out by saying, or talking about recommendation number 27, that's talking about working with external experts to revise the program of the language curriculum to make sure that we're using instructional best practices. And in some of the finer print on this ladder of reading and writing, and if you're not familiar with it, it is available on Nancy's website, and we will be posting the links on the replay and the podcast availability for you to get that. But if you Google the ladder of reading and writing, it's going to come up. So you can access the file. But so this finer print really speaks to how we need to have instruction that's going to make sure all of our students are getting the support they need. And that's one of the things that I think is important to highlight about the recommendations, is that we're not just talking about the students in the red. The strategies that we're advocating for and hoping to have the improvements made based on these recommendations are what's going to get this red level learning the skills that they need to become proficient readers. But some of the other strategies, especially things like morphological awareness and some of those higher order thinking tasks, are definitely going to help the students in the green.
I think, again, it boils down to data informing instruction and practice and differentiating content. So yes, the research supports the value of morphology. The children in the dark red might need more explicit instruction. The children in the light green won't need as much explicit instruction and might be able to go off and do a task much more independently. Or they might be able to jump forward to something that's more advanced, and the dark green particularly. So I just keep saying differentiation is so important for everybody. And in my old ladder, that was one of the reasons I did the update, was because I said before advantageous, and I realized people had misconstrued what I meant. And my background is gifted ed, and I learned about differentiation in the 1990s, Carol Tomlinson's work, as part of my gifted ed training. And so I just assumed people would be differentiating for the range. And what I found was that people weren't. They were actually treating it as more like a one size fits all. So for me, the recommendations, I hope they will be implemented so that differentiation is a key component of the instruction. And so we need to know who needs to know what, how are we going to teach it to that child based on their needs, their circumstances. And there's actually a lot of conversation about that right now. But I had that on a slide a year ago. I printed up my slide because I have this quote. We need to know more about what works for whom under what conditions. And that's been in a lot of my presentations for over a year, maybe longer. And it was from 2 different papers in 2020. So yes, I think it's really important that we serve everybody well as we move forward from the recommendations.
Well, and we need to move away from that one-room schoolhouse model where one teacher can teach everything to all students, and understand that all students need different levels of instruction for different content. And the students in the red definitely need that direct, systematic, explicit instruction in some of the skills that other students aren't. So we need to be able to apply that MTSS or the tiered instruction so that those students in the red can get the support that they need within the school system. So parents aren't on the hook for making sure that they can go to after school tutoring programs to get this basic human right.
Right. And one of the things about the report that I'm so glad to see is they want to get rid of guessing. And when I was in private practice, every student that I taught had been taught to guess based on the pictures. And it was heartbreaking to see. So no more teaching guessing. So that is going. As we move forward with best practice, getting rid of guessing, okay, now what are we doing? Then somewhere in the recommendations, it said based on current best evidence. And I thought that was really important because, again, in the science of reading, it's clear that there's ongoing learning, that there's more research, there's interpretation of the research. So we have to be learners. That's why I always say I'm a learner, because we have to be willing to improve our practice all the time. So get rid of what we know is ineffective, be prepared to really work hard as we move forward with what is effective, and be willing to embrace what will make it even better.
Well, and as educators, whether we realize or not, we did sign up to be lifelong learners. And, the constant advances in technology and brain imaging studies is just bringing us more understanding of how our brain does this miraculous process of learning how to read.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's amazing, the ongoing research, and it's really sad to think how long guessing has lasted, given the fact that those brain scans were being done in the 1990s, and children are still being taught to guess, in British Columbia here. So that's a huge part of the report, is getting rid of guessing strategies. The rest, I think, will continue to evolve as teachers learn with, professional development, better teacher training. But I hope that we can. I've actually argued for a while that the current system is not serving, children who learn more easily either. It's actually holding them back in a lot of cases. So we need to enable every child to move forward every day.
Yeah, and I think teachers are sometimes at a loss for what they can do for those students in the green area while still fitting in the instruction that they need for the red, and I don't know whether you call it amber or orange.
I say orange. Yeah, yeah. Well, I've tried to make clear that there are different approaches to differentiation, and I'm a real fan of all the teachers in one grade, or even better, all the teachers, say from kindergarten to grade 3, they work together. And some schools do this. Mm-hmm. And so your students are getting what they need, and your teacher is comfortable delivering the instruction that is suitable for their group. And it's not that you have to keep the groups the same all the time. You can move them around depending on lots of different factors. But I think we have to be open to a new framework and encourage teachers to recognize it's okay to say you want to work with somebody so that you can share the I think that's really good. And the teachers with whom I've done that love it. They love being the expert at, some are the expert working with kids who have dyslexia, and some are the expert in enrichment, and, they find their niche. And so instead of feeling like you have to meet everybody's needs, there are lots of ways we can get around this. We just need to want to get around this. I feel like in Canada, there's been such a push for teacher autonomy that we've actually left teachers feeling like they should be autonomous and worried that if they aren't doing their own thing in their classroom, perfectly, that they're not doing their job. And I think that that's a shame. And I want teachers to know that you can be collaborative and still have, autonomy. It's just where you become autonomous, but there's a lot of freedom in differentiation.
Well, and I think that kind of ties in nicely to when we're talking about pre-service teacher education programs and setting up these pre-service teachers for success. I know it's been a little while since I did my teacher education training, but we were creating things on our own. There's Teachers Pay Teachers, and try and reinvent the wheel. But everybody loses in that equation when teachers don't have the knowledge that they need to know about reaching students at all levels of the ladder of reading. That needs to be intentional, and we need to make sure that that little time that they have in the teacher education program, they get the support that they need to understand reading instruction and writing instruction, so they're not grasping at straws once they hit the classroom and trying to find what they should do on Teachers Pay Teachers. We need to make the teacher education program explicit and systematic, providing the support to the teachers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they're not going to get everything they need at university. So I think it needs to be ongoing once they get out. I'm sure you're aware some professional development that teachers get is helpful and some isn't. We know that professional development is helpful if you have follow-up and, kind of coaching and so on. And so we need to provide that, because once you get in the classroom and you're working with children and you just can't do it all at once. That was part of the conversation I was in recently, saying we need to recognize that this is going to be ongoing. Maybe it's a different structure, I don't know, but it's not something where we can expect teachers to come out knowing everything. And because the research is changing, look at phonemic awareness. There's such a debate right now as to what best practice in phonemic awareness is. And I've actually seen a pendulum, and some people are doing things that are actually, the researchers are saying, wait a sec now, that's not best practice. So we need to be allow for ongoing learning based on the research and interpretation of the research. Yeah.
Right.
Getting that research to the classroom, I think, and that's another thing I had on my slide from 2 years ago. We need more research on translating science to practice. And Mark Seidenberg said that, 2 weeks ago, and this is a quote from him 2 years ago. And other people are saying that. So we still have a lot to learn. We really know some things are not effective. I mean, guessing based on the pictures, not effective. But how do we move forward? And maybe some things we don't know yet. Communicating what we do not know for research is just as important as translating what we do. And we don't know everything yet. And interestingly enough, the research on advanced readers is very Spartan. There's not much there at all. So, we have a lot to learn. But on the other hand, for me, that makes it exciting because it's instead of teachers thinking, oh, well, I'm going to go in and I have to do this, it's, wow, this is an intellectual pursuit. And I, as a kindergarten grade 1 teacher, have to, have the learning that most people think is just for high school teachers. And we actually are going to be really raising the bar for elementary teachers and saying, hey, we really need you to be, thinking about this and applying knowledge and reading research and so on. And that's just not being a part of elementary education. At least it wasn't a part of mine.
No, it wasn't part of mine. So if you were to design a pre-service teacher education program around reading and writing, what were the main points that you'd want to include?
Oh, well, that's hard to answer because there's so many things you'd say, how long is it and what age and so on. So I don't think I can answer that right off. I would probably refer to this and go through this and go through, okay, what does structured literacy, what does that mean? And go through the components of structured literacy and look at each of them with respect to reading and writing, reading, spelling, and writing. And, I could have put spelling, but it was too long. And writing and, writing, spelling is there. And then what does that mean, facets? And that's where, okay, maybe for reading, they're learning more quickly. They don't need as much explicit instruction, but maybe for writing, they do. Writing is harder than reading for most people. And then here, and this again, you're measuring and monitoring progress and, okay, what, for our very bright children. And I was just talking to a friend of mine this week. I actually emailed her because her son was good friends with my children when they were little, and the kids are all grown now. But I said to my friend, I remembered her son was such an advanced reader and he had ADHD. And I said, did he have problems with writing? Because I just can't remember. And of course, I'm a mom, right? I'm not looking at his writing. But she said, yes, he did have problems with writing. So you can have ADHD, gifted, advanced reader, and still need explicit instruction in writing. Now, maybe you're going to group all these. I think it's just so much fun to think, how are we going to group them? How are we going to do this? And how are we going to make sure that it's fun? And can we have games? And can they create games? And, there are all sorts of great ways to do this, but knowing the fundamentals of what you need to accomplish. They need to read, they need to spell, they need to write, and basically understanding when that is developmentally appropriate as well. So your advanced reader in kindergarten may not be an advanced writer, but developmentally, we don't expect that. So just because they're an advanced reader, it's like I say, we need more research in here, but it is, there are lots of things that need to be covered in PD. But knowing who the children are, the ages, what the background is, and actually, and also whether we are teaching the foundational skills or whether we are actually addressing the needs of children who have not been provided with what they need. And that's okay. You're a mom at home. My kids grew up. I'll just keep going, hi. So again, a school district contacted me recently and said, we'd like to have you in for K-3, and then we'd like to have you in for 4 to, they was 7, and then maybe you could come back and give a session to high school teachers. And I said, okay, let's look at this. First of all, K-3, we're talking about foundational skills. For anything above grade 3 right now, I say this is actually reactive. We're proactive, K-3. Anything above that, I'm going to come in and say, sorry guys, I hate to say it, but this has now become reactive based on a lot of the way that teachers have been taught to teach reading in Canada. And so I'm not going to come in and, you know, Pollyanna and say, oh, if you just do this, I'm going to say, actually, you will have children in your classrooms who have not been taught the foundational skills. And that's a whole different scenario. So PD has to recognize who, what, you know, taking all these differentiation things and putting them into your PD.
Yeah, that is essential. And I mean, if I were to create a pre-service program for language literacy, you know, reading, writing, and spelling development, I think it would be very important in addressing some foundational concepts just to make sure those pre-service teachers understand the simple view of reading. And they understand Scarborough's reading rope and the writing rope. I always forget who to credit for that one. But these are things that really tease out those little skills that we need to be looking at for our students. And just because they have a problem with written language or reading comprehension, we can't just say, here's a one-size-fits-all intervention that's gonna work. And that's where we're seeing problems in the remediation of our students that do get that specific learning disability diagnosis, and why doing that early screening in the primary years is so informative. So we need to make sure that they understand, you know, your ladder of reading and how different students have, sorry, you didn't say access, you said ease.
The ease ranges. And so we need to address the learning needs based on the ease of mastering those skills. Yeah. So if they're learning easily, we address that and we offer them learning opportunities. Yeah, I agree. And some of the basics you've talked about there, you know, are part of a lot of what I do, depending on the topic and depending on who else is part of the PD session. Maybe somebody is already doing the intro and I'm doing something else. And as far as university pre-service training, those basics would be covered in that pre-service training. So yes, the people need to, for sure, there are some foundational things we need to know. That learning to read is not natural. That's, you know, that is the most, and I have that in just about every presentation. Yeah, just figuring out, it's really hard actually. I mean, I've given a lot of PD and I've developed courses and I spent a lot of time customizing because I'm going, okay, what do we need? And working with the people at, you know, the hosting organization. Okay, what do they already have? Because you don't want to repeat. At the same time as you want to make sure that you've covered the essentials. So yeah, and getting teachers involved too in that process. Okay, what do you need? And I think for that guessing, it's really important that teachers understand why the report suggested that be abandoned. That is really important. That we explain why. I'm not going to explain it here, but
yeah, orthographic mapping or that sight word vocabulary is a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation. But I do think we can talk about how we can help teachers that are in service and the professional development that we need to make available to them so that they can expand their practices. I mean, we're just finally starting to make that movement for the pre-service teachers. But if we're being realistic, it's going to be 30, 40 years until our entire teacher population of current teachers has that from their basic training. And we need to make sure that the professional development is in place to see that growing. So understanding the ladder of reading and writing is a great first step, and then figuring out where the teacher needs the appropriate pockets filled.
Yeah, and I would say, I was thinking about this today. There's a sense of urgency, and I get it, and with all my students, we go, we've got to move forward as quickly as you can. And we want to stop this treadmill of failure that's been happening for so long in so many places. At the same time as be careful about rushing in, because the pendulum swing that is happening in some places, I think, is a consequence of people rushing. And what's happening is schools are buying materials. They're thinking, oh, this is the magic bullet. And they buy all these materials. And then they're finding out, actually, maybe this wasn't what we needed. So I think to be thoughtful about it. And that's why this collaboration is really important. Leadership is involved, the learning support. I think there's been a lot of top-down direction, and I've certainly heard teachers say that. And if we can be more collaborative, and there are a lot of online learning opportunities, particularly since COVID. So I don't think it's a lack of learning; it's just being careful about where choosing. And maybe maybe a school says, okay, you're going to focus on this aspect, and you're going to focus on this aspect, and there's a lot of conversation about dialect right now. So if you've got a school that needs to have that understanding of the importance of dialect, then maybe somebody is designated to take a webinar and then come back and share with the school. It's easy to get overwhelmed. I mean, I get overwhelmed myself. There's so much information. So say, okay, slow down. And how can we divide this up? And how can we manage this? And how can we do small steps to be able to move forward to the big steps? Recognizing we all feel urgency at the same time as we don't want to have to backtrack. That's hard.
Definitely. And I've been fortunate enough to speak with a few people over the past couple of weeks that have been part of that transition process, realizing that this transition from a balanced literacy approach to teaching reading and all the resources available are taking about 3 to 5 years to get one that's more aligned with the structured literacy. And it can be very difficult for schools who have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in resources and products, and now they're being told, well, actually, just toss those out. But then what do you replace them with? And the cost and time and effort. So it's going at it with a systematic approach. And I've spoken to someone from the States and from New Zealand who are a little bit further along in this process than we are in Canada. And they're saying, it needs to be that whole school approach, getting this new learning before dumping all of your current practices and moving forward with the better instruction. And then as a school, when you're working with that consultant to help you through that process, figuring out what teaching group is ready to take that next step. And then it doesn't necessarily mean it's the K1, 2, 3 teachers. It may be the teachers, in the 4, 5, 6 range, or, other ranges that are ready to take that next big step towards a structured literacy approach to teaching language. Now, when we do that, that means that we're providing the proper support to give them the knowledge that they need to move forward, instead of giving them like a 2-hour seminar on phonemic awareness and expecting them to dive right in. We need to have that structured support for them to succeed.
Yep, it varies. It does take time. I think what I find too is people leave. That's the reality. You know, people go to other schools, they move. I mean, that's life, right? So how do you set that up? And I know that there have been, you know, I've been watching the conversations with leadership and so on, and the reality that it does take a while. I really like teachers to be involved. One of the models in the States that I found out about at one of the conferences a few years ago was they actually do PD with their teachers. Their teachers are involved in selecting a program, and then they are involved with selecting what they're going to do to enhance that program. And that's really important to know, because there is no one program that's going to serve everybody. And so the enhancement is really important for this. Oh, there was something else I was going to say and it's gone, but the teacher education, understanding it's a learning process. And when you talked about maybe it's not 1 to 3, I've seen that in schools where some teachers are just ready, you know, they just are ready to absorb this, and others are not quite ready, and we respect that, and just let people go at their own pace. And sometimes those that are jumping in can come back and model, oh, this is what I did, or, you know, this is what I'm thinking. But there is no one program. I think is really, really important for people to understand. I think people are hoping there's going to be the magic bullet, and there just isn't. And based on what I'm hearing from the researchers, there will never be, because for a program to be perfect enough to serve everybody, the program would be too big. So so part of this is sometimes honoring what teachers, oh, I know what I wanted to say, what teachers are doing well, and bringing that in. You know, they don't have to change everything. And as far as the materials go, I really struggle with this idea of throwing everything away and replacing it. I believe that you can use materials in a different way. I think when we've spent taxpayer money and we've had PACs raising money, we don't want to throw those away. So how do we use them in effective ways? And you can figure it out. And then at the same time, if you're going to be replacing, let's not replace for one group. And you have to remember, for bringing in new materials, they've got to serve everybody. And not necessarily that one will be good for all, but I'm saying, you know, I'm thinking about decodables. Yes, you know, it's certainly debated, but for, you know, certainly a lot of people believe that for children to be learning, we want decodables, but in the red, but we don't need decodables for children in the green. And so actually there's a danger of holding some children back if we really narrow our focus too much. So we really have to have a broad focus. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I don't think we cannot try to serve everybody better.
Yeah, and I would recall, I believe it was Jennifer Buckingham, you know, or I can't remember who exactly it was, but when we're looking at some of those leveled texts, it's really about replacing some of those, you know, first few levels that are very much that predictable text that, you know, a kindergarten student who is not in the green level are not going to have the skills to get. And we want to remove those from, you know, sending those to asking students to read these when they clearly are depending on the pictures and the sentence story to get through the book, because that's not helping them learn how to decode and access the print.
Right. Some of those books I've used in some schools where, I mean, you've got often 4 copies of the same book, so you can use it for a different reason. You can say, okay, if the children can read them, they're not guessing based on the pictures. Okay, you could have teams. You could say, okay, who can find how many nouns are in this book? You could find how many verbs are in this book. There are ways that you can use these simple books in other ways as good materials. So
yeah, they can be repurposed,
yes,
but not used for that initial reading instruction when we're working on the basics.
right. And you would because of the way they're set up, they're not set up to be advantageous for children who are struggling. We know that. You have to. If you can't decode them, you're going to be looking at the pictures. So yeah, you wouldn't be using them for your children who are learning to decode. But yes, we can repurpose for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I find, we have a lot of great thought leader teachers out there that are really advocating and making the move. Some of them are, have been on this journey to discovering more about structured literacy through the various Facebook groups and all the wonderful webinars and trainings that have been available, so that they're farther along in their journey. And what we're seeing is in those schools where the teachers have aligned their practices, especially in the lower elementary grades, and the teachers in grade 1 and grade 2 are saying, whoa, what did you do with these students? They're, when they have the instruction from you, they're coming to the class with so much more than these other students. How is this happening? What's the difference? Mm-hmm. And that's where we're seeing some of that change occurring. But unfortunately, we don't have the time for that one thought leader in a school to, have that ripple effect. If we want to do what's best for our students, we need to kind of give it a push and get it. So this is happening. And I really commend the Ontario Ministry of Education for making the commitment to ensuring that this process is happening at a little bit of a more quicker rate. And we need other schools, other ministries and districts to follow suit, especially when it comes to revising the curriculums to align them with the best practices that are going to be able to reach all of those individuals on the ladder.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the alignment, the curriculum will, that's going to take longer, and that needs to be done very thoughtfully. I think getting rid of guessing is, to me, and replacing it with what the child needs for, the ease at which they learn to read is really the bottom line for all this. The other tweaking will have to be done carefully. I want to make sure that word differentiation's in there all the way through. I just saw it in teacher training, so I'm thinking, wait a sec now, what about schools and school boards? So I think we owe it to teachers to make sure that we don't want a pendulum swing. Education is full of pendulum swings, and so this that's why the ladder is so important, because if you are developing a curriculum that serves everybody here, then you've got a much greater success than just serving one area. So that's my hope, is that we can really truly improve it for everybody.
If you see the balanced literacy curriculums, really targeting those bright green students and not giving the support for the red students, and the fear of this swing back to phonics, having it so that it is just the red students. That's the fear. But what this report is advocating for and setting forward in its recommendations is making sure that we still reach those green students while supporting the red students, and making sure that we have the resources available, the knowledge, and the external support. There are a lot of great individuals, within Canada, within North America, and around the world that can definitely help facilitate this process and make sure that we're able to meet the needs of all of our students, because it is what's best for all. I mean, there's lots of research about what happens to the red students when they're not getting the support that they need, but there's also information of what's happening to those green students who aren't getting the support that they need to really meet their potential. And
A
when
little bit there is. I know, I don't know all of it. I'm always searching, but it's definitely there. We need more. And that's why I'm so passionate about being careful about this, because, the research showing what the, and understanding that intellectually, you can have difficulty learning to read. And so we've really got to figure it out. I don't know that, I don't know that there's as much on this as how to really serve children. So they're getting in the intellectual engagement if learning to read and write is more challenging, and just different ways of grouping and different ways of instructing and different ways of bringing in personal strengths and interests and so on to really keep them motivated and happy. There's not a lot of talk about that, I find.
Well, and understanding, something that I often say to my children when they're upset about stuff is fair doesn't mean the same. And it doesn't mean equal. So the students in the red will not excel with the instruction for the students in the green. And the students in the green aren't going to be getting enough from just the instruction for the students in the red. So teachers need to become experts in their craft so they can address all of their students in one lesson and have those abilities to have things that, even though the class is focusing on a skill that is easier for those few students that are at the green in the class, they can still throw in little tidbits that are at least going to get those green students engaged. Because realistically, when you have one teacher and 20 to 30 kids, they're not going to be able to individualize for every student in the class. But when they have those little tidbits to throw in, I mean, one of my favorites is throwing in stuff about phones themes and just throwing in those little comments that are seemingly, just off the cuff, bizarre, and maybe slightly off topic, but it's going to engage those green minds.
Right. I call it peppering. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that I really see as being important is if you're going to have whole group instruction, like whole class, instruction, it's short, it's very intentional. You're covering your bases maybe for spelling or teaching a writing component for the green. But in some cases, whole class instruction is being given to everybody, and it's way too long for these students. So when you say one lesson, I know the reality, but that's why I say we've got to work collaboratively across the grades and between the grades and so on, because we need to serve all. So yeah, it's a juggling. It really is. And it's an ongoing effort. It depends on your class. It really depends on your class too. But I know some teachers who are doing it in one classroom who are doing an amazing, amazing job. So in their situation, it's because their colleagues still want to be using the other methods that have been now discounted by this report. But they're differentiating in their classroom. They're doing amazing enrichment. It's incredible. In one grade one class, teacher with whom I was working, one of her students ended up being accelerated at the end of the year. She could see he was advanced, and even though she was enriching, it still wasn't enough. And so she said to the principal, he needs to be accelerated, and he wasn't. A lot of educators don't know the supporting research for acceleration is very strong. So maybe these children here are accelerated within the subject or accelerated a whole class. So keep it, that's part of the training for teachers, is to make them aware of this too. Yeah, and it could be you've got your very gifted student who needs to be accelerated in math, who has dyslexia, and we need to be open to that. So I think, but again, a lot of teachers just they haven't received this in their training either. So there's a lot to be improved.
Definitely. Now I want to take a moment to see if anybody had any questions before we go, because we are just about running out of time, and I know that Nancy has a lot of valuable information and she's a great resource that we definitely should consider as one of those external consultants that can help support us on this transition to meeting the recommendations from the Right to Read initiative, because we do need to make sure that our students are getting the support that they need.
Yeah, and right now I'm so busy. Some people have contacted me, and I sometimes refer them. Sometimes I refer them to you or to other people in the States based on their need, based on where they live, and so on. It's a little hard to keep up, but I think for a school to realize they want to move forward in getting support is a huge step. And in Canada, I've never met a school that didn't have PD of some sort during the year. So it's just a matter of how to use your PD money and your PD hours and move this forward. And in terms of that, you're also going to be bringing in different people with different skills, because there's no way you can know everything. So there are people who are really focused on morphology, and people who are really focused on syntax. And I'm saying, bring them in, because I don't have time, to keep up with everything. And so it's okay to be prepared to bring in different people, just as long as you're coordinating who's saying what, and who's already taught this, so you don't have to do it again. But it's a lot, and it's an ongoing learning journey for sure. Seems like the more I know, the more I don't know, and the more I recognize, whoa, there's a lot to learn. So I'm actually, with my focus right now, apart from the message in my ladder of reading, my focus is very much on differentiation. Really getting that, and that's part of my ladder, it's part of the update, but actually helping people bringing actually the research from gifted ed into the science of reading. And then my focus is on twice exceptional students, because most people just aren't even aware that you could be super bright and have trouble learning to read, or have attention regulation issues that are getting in the way. And then thirdly, the focus on movement. So those are my areas, and that's where I'm really trying to address those gaps. Yeah. Okay, there's somebody.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad everybody has enjoyed this conversation. I always enjoy connecting with and speaking with Nancy. And I know you have an upcoming webinar series.
Yeah. This week there's some. It's being
April 9th.
The Learning Consortium in Edmonton is hosting a 3-part series. It's starting Wednesday. And so if you go on my Facebook page, it's just scroll down, it's there somewhere. And then on Thursday, there's a fundraiser for people in Ukraine being sponsored, or being hosted, by Step by Step Learning. And all the profits are going to supporting people in Ukraine. That's Thursday morning. That's, I think, on my Facebook page as well. It's pretty hard for me to keep up with social media, but I think both those things are there. So yeah, those are this week, and a few other things as well that are just, not open to the public. But both those, I encourage you to go and look at those options. Thank you, Kathryn, for having me. It's always fun to share information through your platform.
Thank you. And so this talk is going to be available for replay on the Right to Read Initiative website, the YouTube channel, and available as a podcast episode on the Right to Read Initiative podcast. And if you are someone attending this and think it would be a great opportunity to talk and speak about what you are doing in your role in helping reach the goals of the Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read inquiry, I'd love to speak to you. I'm always looking for more people to join me on conversations like this. I think the best way to keep the report and recommendations in the front is having these so that we can make sure that it doesn't fade into the background, because this report really does have groundbreaking recommendations. It's different from a lot of the other ones that we've seen in the past. We've talked about the theory. This gives the practice on the steps that we need to take to move this forward. So I have inserted a link to how you can connect with me so we can discuss these further.
And can I just say one thing, a little shout out to Dean Stanton. The artist for the Climbing Children is from Calgary, Alberta. So this is really, if you're from Canada, this is Canadian content. And yeah, and Dean illustrated my book as well, but I always like to give a shout out for Dean. He's fun and funky. And hey, that's a good message. This can be fun and it can be really creative and funky. So yeah, we need more on that.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.